How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Good to see you
again.
Great crowd.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Well, I'm going to start with a big picture look. Workforce development, as we've discussed today, is a complex puzzle with many pieces. There's educators, employers, nonprofits, and governments like yours. And what do you see as the city's role in aligning all of that? Can you lay that out for us?
Well, it's critically important. You know, we were facing a global pandemic, the economic fallout associated with that, greatest reckoning on race in this country probably since 1968. We knew that when we were thinking about a recovery, that we wanted it to be dynamic and inclusive. And at the core of that is workforce and preparation and investing in people. Particularly, the overwhelming majority of folks in our community are doing better than ever before. But about a third of our region, our community, has not shared in Columbus's success. So we put together with the private sector and other nonprofit philanthropic leaders a recovery and resiliency committee back in 2020 and 2021 that said, okay, after the Great Recession, there was a recovery, but not everyone shared in that recovery as quickly as others. In fact, disproportionately poor neighbors only got back to where they were pre-Great Recession when the pandemic hit. And they were in total free fall. And the economy dramatically changed, as you remember, during that period of time. So we said we need to really focus on making sure that as this recovery took place that we've seen over the last couple of years, that it included everybody. And so we made significant investments. Childcare, as you know, got turned upside down. Something like 41% of childcare centers closed during the pandemic, never reopened. Devastating impact on women in the workforce. Obviously held a lot of families back from reaching their full potential during this recovery. And so we did a couple of things, doubled down and invested in childcare workers and childcare centers, opened up a $25 million center on the Hilltop, the early learning center there, because what we discovered was there were fewer kids on the Hilltop enrolled in high quality early learning than anywhere else in the city. And as Dr. Harrison talked about, an unprecedented, exciting partnership. Incredible, another example of the Columbus way, the Columbus promise. I mean, the last term, I don't know if Dr. Harrison is still here, I think we had 848 graduates of Columbus City Schools enrolled. It's continuing to grow each year. A great opportunity. So nobody was more negatively impacted by the pandemic and the fallout than our young people. In the Columbus Promise, I think we're going to look back as one of the greatest game changers, not just with respect to opportunities, but I envision our community becoming America's opportunity city, the nation's capital for upward mobility, and a place you're more likely to go from poverty to the middle class and beyond than anywhere else. And the Columbus Promise is going to be a key part of that.
And I want to go back to what you're mentioning with childcare. I think that's a good example of some of those topics and challenges that we're facing as a rapidly growing city, where at first glance they may not seem like a workforce development issue, but they really are. And two that we often hear about in Columbus are public transportation needs and housing needs. Can you help folks understand why those are workforce issues and what you're doing to address those problems?
Absolutely right. Our three top priorities and focus at the city are safety, housing, and transit. And we have to continue. We've seen record reductions, not just in this city, but in cities across America in violent crime, which is great. It's due to the great work of the Division of Police and our community. I think the police and community are working closer together now than ever before, and that's why we're seeing such great success. Safety is a workforce development and economic development issue, but so is housing and transit. And we all know that we're about 200,000 units short in this region that we need to bring online in the next 10 years. And so Columbus Promise was a great example of Columbus Way. The Regional Housing Coalition is another great example of the Columbus Way. And so I see Jason Hall and his colleagues here from the partnership. This is going to be a new effort incubated at the partnership. So when you think about Columbus 2020 and One Columbus and what that has been to economic development, the Regional Housing Coalition is going to be that for housing. And this group is going to wake up every day figuring out how do we get 200,000 units in the pipeline in this region in the next 10 years. And by the way, it's more of all. We need more market rate. We need more workforce. We need more affordable housing. We have a supply crisis. And you go back to Econ 101, and if your supply is flat and demand continues to grow, you know why so many folks in this community right now are feeling that squeeze, particularly if they're lower wage earners, folks on fixed income, seniors. They're feeling this squeeze right now. But it's impacting a lot of young people too. I mean, looking around the room, how many folks have grown adult children that are living in your basements because they can't afford the down payment and rents? I see some hands go.
I know Lisa's back there.
We need to free the basements up of Central Ohio and get these folks in housing. And these are folks that are working hard, playing by the rules, but because home prices and rents are growing faster than wages, the best way for us to fight homelessness, to provide more opportunities for young people and continue to be attractive as a region is to get those 200,000 units in the pipeline. I really appreciate Jason and the partnership's engagement on this. And I'd really say in the last 20 years, the business community thought this was the right thing to do, getting people in housing, fighting homelessness. I think it's really been in the last 5 or 10 years when this supply crisis has really impacted everybody in this community that folks have realized this is an economic development issue. We cannot continue on this trajectory with respect to job creation, economic development, an incredible 10, 20-year run without more housing.
And with the coalition, the thinking is that can't be something that Columbus is trying to address on its own. It needs to be a broader regional approach.
So I've spent a lot of time visiting with folks around the region because, and I've raised our hand, I said Columbus will do 100,000 of the 200,000 units. We're updating our zoning code for the first time in 70 years. The first chapter of Zone In passed unanimously by council to a standing ovation. When was the last time a major zoning code overhaul took place in any city across the country where there wasn't, a true divided civil war going on? And so, but you mentioned transit, and the transformational Link Us issue that passed overwhelmingly by voters last fall is going to be another game changer, another incredible public-private partnership just along the Link Us corridors. Before Zone In, we were expecting 8,000 units along the major transit corridors of the region. Just with the passage of the first part, because we're going to do 3 different steps in the Zone In process, that number of units goes up to 88,000. Almost what we need as a city over the next 10 years just along these Link Us corridors, which is so critically important with respect to transit supportive infrastructure, transit-oriented development. And if we do it the right way and embrace density and height, we can fight off gentrification and displacement.
Well, I know you just rolled out a proposed capital budget this week, and I'm wondering if there's anything in there that we should be keeping an eye on when it comes to the workforce issues.
Oh, there are so many things that you should keep an eye on.
We've got 5 minutes. So we'll see how
Where
much
do
we
I
can get
start? In this, I'll make a differentiation. So we have a capital budget that I've introduced, but we also have a bond package that'll be on the ballot this fall. We do these bond packages about every 3 or 4 years. So a lot of you are used to voting for these things. And it's great because I think longtime auditor Hugh Dorian, I think maybe in his senior undergraduate program back in the 1950s, helped us create the SIT program. So a quarter of every dollar we receive in income tax revenue, we put in the SIT so that we're able to get public voted debt through these bond packages without levying a property tax. We haven't levied a property tax as a city since 1956. So thank you, Mr. Dorian, for putting this incredible program in place. But because we get public voted authority, there's much more interest in having this public voted authority without raising taxes. Saves us millions and millions of dollars of interest, but it allows us to invest in our neighborhoods, create jobs, which then generates income tax revenue, which then supports basic city services. 80% of basic city services are funded by local income tax revenue, which is critically important. So, fourth water plant, that's part of the current capital budget plan, $50 million for housing, additional investments in police substations at some of the most important job centers. A lot of people don't realize Easton is the second biggest job center in Central Ohio, only outside of downtown Easton. And those are not the mall jobs and the restaurant jobs. We're talking about Alliance Data, we're talking about MI, we're talking about Huntington, we're talking about all the major other employers that are around Easton. So having safety and security being top of mind with the new Easton sub is critically important. Other critical investments are going to be, has anybody hit a pothole recently? A record number of investments in street resurfacing, biggest investment in fire apparatus. We continue to grow and open up new fire stations. And so fire apparatus is going to be a critical piece of that. But there's so many other things that we're doing, but we're excited about the bond package. Encourage everybody to get educated about it. Talk to your friends, neighbors, folks you work with about the bond package on the ballot this fall. $500 million for housing, the biggest housing investment in the city's history. And we can do it all by not raising taxes, creating jobs, and supporting basic city services.
Okay. We're getting down to the wire here, but there is one more initiative I wanted to chat about, which we wrote about recently in our newsletter, which is Smart Columbus's Digital Skills Hub, which is providing residents with free training and, if they qualify, a free device like a tablet or a laptop. And I was hoping you could talk about how serious our digital divide is here and how that might be affecting our pipeline of workers.
So in addition to childcare, it was one of the top issues that came out of the Recovery and Resiliency Advisory Committee. I think what we found out during the pandemic, that access to high-speed internet was no longer a luxury or an amenity. It was a requirement, a necessity. And if we didn't invest in access, the disparity that we saw laid bare during the pandemic would only grow, widen, and deepen. And so I'm really excited about this. This is the largest investment in digital equity anywhere in America. And again, another great example of the Columbus way, great public and private partnership, the faith community, nonprofits, and others that are really, it's one thing to provide access, it's another thing to train and educate our neighbors on how to best use this technology. I think the greatest challenge of the 21st century is how do we, as a people, harness and leverage innovation and technology to help people improve their own lives. And this is a perfect example of that. And I think another reason why the recovery that we're seeing and that we're going to continue to see and the growth of this region is going to be dynamic and inclusive because we were purposeful and intentional about where we were going to invest, how we were going to invest, and continue to lift up neighbors who have been left out and left behind in this Columbus success story. We know that if we're all prospering and thriving and growing together, this community will have an incredible century ahead of it, but it will require us to make some difficult decisions in the next 5 or 10 years around land use, around transit, around housing, and around investments in workforce development. But I've never been more bullish about Central Ohio's future than now.
Well, I know you just recently finished a year as the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and as a note to end on, don't want you to talk badly about our peers, but I'm wondering what makes Columbus the best city to live in?
People. Yeah, it was an incredible blessing. It's the first time the mayor of Columbus has served as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. An incredible honor to represent cities across the country. And this conference in particular is very special to me because it's one of the last bipartisan organizations left in America. And that's really important to me because in this hyper-partisan, divided, sometimes rancorous national and state dialogue, mayors are still standing and delivering, doing incredible things. And so to serve as president, I want to thank the people of Columbus and my family for their flexibility and grace of the last year. I've spent a lot more time outside the city than I ever have before with those duties. But I think my wife and I were just as excited last Sunday to become the past president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors as we were becoming president a year ago. But thrilled to have those relationships and a chance to really lift up Columbus and tell our story nationally and even internationally. It was a great opportunity and a great blessing.
I'm glad you had a good experience and you were able to represent us during your duties.
Thank
so
you.
Appreciate it. We are out of time, but I wanted to thank you again for joining us today.